Welcome to Trib Talk. I'm Jennifer Napier-Pearce with the Salt Lake Tribune. Shortly after her election as president of the National Education Association, Lily Eskelsen García told her supporters that the nation's teachers will not be silent when it comes to school funding, to testing, and reform measures. And today on Trib Talk, we're talking about those issues and more with Lily Eskelsen García, who joins us from her office in Washington, D.C. And it's great to have you. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations.
Thank you, and it's good to be back in Utah, even though it's over a computer feed.
Lily Eskelsen García is a former Utah teacher. She's a former president of the Utah Education Association and a former congressional candidate here. Earlier this month, she was elected by 8,000 delegates as president of the 3.5 million member NEA, the nation's largest teachers union. And we invite you to join our conversation with Lily Eskelsen García today. If you've got questions about high-stakes testing or the Common Core or other education topics, please feel free to join us. You can send your thoughts to the hashtag TribTalk on Twitter and Google+. You can put your comments right here at sltrib.com. You can also send us a text, and the number is 801-609-8059. Before we dive into some of the real meaty issues, tell us a bit about your teaching experience here in Utah. What lessons did you learn teaching in the Utah classroom that are helping to shape your agenda as NEA president?
Well, of course, teaching an overcrowded class of 12-year-olds helps when you want to work with Congress. You know, I think that goes without saying. But it's the old everything I know I learned in kindergarten. Everything I know about what kids need, I learned in a Utah classroom. I taught at Orchard Elementary in West Valley for 10 years. And had the most amazing faculty, the most amazing friends and colleagues who would sit together at lunch and just solve the world's problems. I know how important that collaborative, respectful relationship is, and I know how we tried so hard, even in my class with 39 fifth graders one year, we tried to really personalize and customize what it meant to serve those kids. That's what we're losing. You know, probably the best gig I ever had in Utah in a classroom was I taught at the homeless shelter. And I taught at the Christmas box house. These were special needs kids who had nothing going for them except that school, that little space inside the shelter where someone could try and understand what was going on in the rest of their lives so that we could make their learning experience something meaningful to them, even if they were only going to be there a month or two. Those are the things that I think the world needs to know about our American schools and American teachers, is that we're really trying so hard to reach those individual kids, to be able to communicate with those families that need to know what's going on. And what we've been given, especially since No Child Left Untested, is all anybody needs to know is if you hit the cut score on a math and reading commercial standardized test. That's it. My kids needed so much more from me. And that's what I told these voters at the NEA convention. I want to be a voice that says we care about the whole blessed child.
Well, let's continue where I dropped off. I'm not sure what happened, and I apologize for the technical issues. It is full of surprises, these Google Hangouts. We were talking about your experience here in Utah as a teacher, sort of shaping the agenda that you've got going as NEA president. I'm also curious about the NEA generally and about union membership. And I came across some numbers, I believe it's the Department of Labor, said that only about 35% of teachers and school employees are union members. So why? Why aren't more people joining the union family? And why do you think that teachers' unions are still relevant?
I think that's an incorrect number on how many, what percentage of educators belong to the association. So we're going to check that. I said it really loud so people would go scurrying around trying to find the real number. But in a place like Utah, about 75% of our Utah teachers belong to the Utah Education Association, which is our affiliate, and that's in a right-to-work state where you have to convince people that you are relevant to what they want. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I wanted to belong to the UEA and the NEA from the first day I walked into a class in 1980 when I taught 4th grade at Orchard was I knew that someone would care about speaking the truth to politicians, to the public, to taxpayers, to tell them what I needed to do my job. It was so clear to me that without the teacher's voice, they're saying, here's what it means to have a class that's almost 40 kids in a class. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's the purpose of this school. And we need the tools to do our jobs. And the UEA would go up and, you know, knock on the legislative doors year after year, and I could see that someone was at least representing my voice. Nobody else was going to do that if we didn't do it for ourselves. So I've always been a very proud member of the UEA, the Granted Education Association, and the National Education Association.
Let's talk about the state of our schools generally. On your blog, you criticize the, quote, movie makers, billionaire brothers, and conservative politicians who have made poor decisions on behalf of U.S. students, excuse me. And maybe you can elaborate on what you see as poor decisions.
The poorest, let's start there, that you can somehow have a kid hit a cut score on a math and reading standardized commercial test, and that's all you need to know about that child. Then you can tell if that child gets to go to 4th grade. Do you know in Oklahoma, over 8,000 8-year-old kids, 8,000 3rd graders miss the cut score on the reading test by a few points, and we're told you're not smart enough to go to 4th grade. One test that they took at one time that whole year, and nothing else they did that whole year mattered. That's insane. And these are politicians who somehow believe that we're running a factory and these kids can be plugged in and perform to specifications. It really is a factory model, and we're all test technicians. And what we do is produce scores on a standardized test. We know that parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and all of the big people out there want something very different for the children in their community, the children in their family. They want a caring, competent, professional teacher who is really going to give those kids a broad experience of opening their minds to things that they didn't even know they could do. And so this whole insanity, this very political machine of it's all about, did you hit a cut score on a standardized test, then you get to graduate, then you get to go to 4th grade. Oh, and by the way, maybe we'll fire your teachers if they don't hit their quota of how many kids needed to hit the cut score on that standardized test. You know, I'm not sure those were really good models in a factory. I know that they've been devastating models in a school.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with the new president of the National Education Association, former Utah teacher Lily Eskelsen García, and you can send your questions and comments to the hashtag Trib Talk on Twitter and Google+, or put them right here at sltrib.com. Let's talk more about high-stakes testing. You've been very, very critical, calling it testing abuse, while others say it's just accountability. Why isn't testing a good way to measure student learning and teacher performance?
You know, we're teachers, we invented tests. We would be struck by lightning if we said students shouldn't take tests. But you know, there was never any one commercial standardized test that I gave to my kids at Orchard and said, now if you miss that cut score by 1 point, you don't get to go to 6th grade. That's what's insane is, wait, you use the test to give you some information about how that child is doing. And I gave summative reports. They were called report cards. and I would put a grade on that report card. So I understand that you do have to evaluate kids and you do have to make a judgment on how well they did. But if it was a reading or math or social studies or science, because when you're an elementary teacher you teach everything, I would say, okay, here's the science unit, here's our goal, here's our objective to learn, and we're going to do the chapter test, and we're going to do a science fair, and I'm going to have you write a report, and we're going to do an experiment, and you're going to explain to me why that magnet worked the way it did. Whatever it was, I knew that my kids learned in different ways. I would always have someone in my classroom that had some kind of reading disability, some kind of special need. Sometimes my gifted and talented kids had a special need. They were jumpy kids. They had a hard time sitting still for. I was always able to use my own creativity as a professional teacher to say, all right, how am I going to get this child to demonstrate that they learned the concept? And sometimes it was a paper pencil test, and sometimes it was explaining it to me. Sometimes it was showing me something and working with it with their hands, especially in science. So that's the dilemma we have. Even the question you asked, what's wrong with tests? Usually there's not too much wrong with the test, although some tests are very poorly put together. Most tests, for what they were designed to measure, may be very good tests. But if you end up taking this one test that was designed to tell you if this kid needed a little more of this and a little more of that, and you said, okay, I'm going to use it to say you don't get to go to 4th grade, that's when it becomes toxic. That's the toxic testing. It's not even the particular test. It's how the test results are used to make life-changing decisions sometimes for a boy or a girl.
Let's move on to the Common Core. Last week, Utah's governor, Gary Herbert, asked the state attorneys general to look at the state's legal obligation to embrace the Common Core curriculum. It's been a hotly debated topic, not only here in Utah, but throughout states across the nation. Why does the NEA stand behind the Common Core?
It's they're going to spend probably a lot of time and money if it's the purpose is to do what you just suggested. What is our legal obligation as a state to embrace the Common Core or not? There is no legal obligation. It's not a federal law. It's something that came from the Governors Association, which I understand Governor Herbert is going to be the chair of in the not too distant future. It came from a coalition of governors and state superintendents, and they wanted specifically to keep it out of the hands of Congress. Thank you. That was a very wise move, by the way. You cannot have Congress running with scissors anymore. We just have to say stop. So these governors, for the best of intentions, said, all right, how about if everywhere in this country you can look and say, all right, 3rd graders are supposed to know how they're supposed to memorize their single-digit times tables. Because when we get to 4th grade, we're going to teach them how to do double-digit multiplication. So let's have everyone kind of agree that that's what 3rd graders should learn in math. This is what 4th graders should learn in math. I actually was very suspicious of the Common Core. These are standards. It's a little sentence or two. It's a description in language arts and in math of what each grade level should be able to do. And I was so tired of the standardized tests, multiple choice. If you can't put it on a multiple choice test, it doesn't count, because very few of the most important things I taught to my kids could be reduced to a multiple choice test. But then I read them. And I've challenged people who have said, I heard bad things about the Common Core. You can go up online and just type in Common Core state standards, and you can put an app on your phone. How pathetic. I have an app of the Common Core on my phone. This is a cry for help. But I thought, before I criticize something, I better read it. So I read, and things like, give an opinion, explain why you have that opinion, show the reason and evidence why this or that. I went, wow, You can't put that on a multiple choice test. I'm all over that. So, and it doesn't tell you how to teach it, and it doesn't tell you how to assess it. It just says third graders should know, sixth graders should know. One of the ninth grade Common Core standards, this student will be able to use digital media to enhance a presentation. Wow! I mean, I could tell you if a ninth grader used digital media and it actually enhanced their presentation, but think about it. It's assuming that there'll be a presentation, and it's assuming that this child is going to have access to digital media, kind of like what we're using right here. So you have passed one of the ninth grade Common Core standards. Way to go, Jennifer. Exactly. And by the way, you wouldn't be able to put this on a standardized test. You could assess it. You could say, yes, you did it, and I could give you an ABC on it. So one of the things I like about the Common Core is that if you do it right, and that's a big if, you would be putting some real power back in the hands of that classroom teacher to say, get creative, collaborate, do projects. That's a good thing. My problem is that a whole bunch of states, New York being probably the most cautionary tale, they didn't actually read the standards. They just thought it was another thing to memorize. And so they said, okay, here's another test, and we don't care if it's really aligned to these standards, and you're still going to get hired, fired, you get to go to fourth grade or graduate based on if you hit a cut score. They did it all wrong. They implemented it in a really, really foolish way. And so, of course, if you talk to New York teachers right now and you say, how do you feel about the Common Core standards, they're talking about the whole thing about implementing it, and they want it to go away, and nobody can blame them. The politicians messed it up.
Well, the critics here in Utah certainly would say that there's no more local control under Common Core, that the data collection is being done elsewhere, the standards are being set elsewhere, and I guess a few states, including Oklahoma and South Carolina, have already dumped it. I mean, what do you think the future of Common Core, not only here in Utah, but nationwide, looks like?
Here's the thing. Let's say they were perfect. They're not. Nothing is. But let's say you had perfect standards. Let's say you could invent the perfect assessments for that. You could actually have a test that said, I can tell you if these kids and what they've learned on the Common Core standards, math, language arts. Let's pretend you could do that. If you don't change the toxic testing, if you say, we got that and it's all perfect, but we're still going to use the standardized test, we're still going to tell a third grader, if you don't hit this cut score, you don't get to go to fourth grade. We're still going to tell a high school senior, I don't care what you did all year long, you missed the math test by 2 points, so you can't graduate. It won't matter if the standards are perfect. Remember, the standards are just a description of what a kid at each grade level should be able to do. So when people say there's no more local control, okay, I really like the standard about give an opinion. You could give me, in that building, in that classroom, the local. You don't get more local than I'm looking at that kid's face. I know your name. Give that professional teacher what they need to say, I can make these standards come alive. But you've got to do something about this foolish testing that is not aligned to anything you just told me to do. And they're all about punishment. They're all about punishing the kids for not hitting a cut score, punishing the teachers because they didn't have their quota of kids that hit a cut score. That's the toxic part. That's the part where people are saying, I don't want the federal government to tell me how to punish my kids. The Common Core doesn't do that, unless your state legislature, by the way, makes them do it. And like in New York, it wasn't the federal government, it was the state legislature that kept saying we have to have ways of punishing kids and punishing teachers if they don't hit a cut score on a test. That was what messed up true standards.
Speaking with Lily Eskelsen García, she's the incoming president of the National Education Association and a former Utah teacher. And if you've got questions or comments, feel free to join us to the hashtag Trib Talk on Twitter and Google+, or put your comments right here at sltrib.com. I want to get to one comment. Alien Rants. We use monikers here. So Alien Rants writes, I do hope you discuss how powerful the NEA is as a lobbyist organization, and ask her why they lobby for amnesty. I'm assuming this has to do with some of the comments on immigration that you've made. Maybe you can talk about the lobbying function of NEA, what your priorities are, and then maybe chime in on the immigration issue.
I always take it as a huge compliment when people say, but you're a big lobbyist. The best lobbyists in the world are Utah teachers, by the way. When we get in front of a politician, whether that's Orrin Hatch or any of them, and we can talk about what's going on in our classroom. We're not hired lobbyists. A lobbyist is only someone that wants to explain to a politician who's about to make a big decision for our kids, for our communities, for our schools. This is the impact. Listen to us. What we want as we go out there and try and influence politicians is we want them to understand what kind of impact that decision is going to have on someone's little boy, someone's little girl, their ability to make their dreams come true. And I assume that the question, as you assume, on amnesty deals with immigration reform. And I have been a major spokesperson and will grab every microphone I can to talk about how we have to help a very vulnerable group of our students. We call them dreamers. They were brought here as children by their parents, often by very desperate parents who felt like they had very few options to take care of their families back home. I never want to judge what someone who is that desperate might do to help their family survive. But I absolutely know that these young boys and girls, these kids coming into our school, did not make a decision. They came with their parents, and they're in limbo. They're in legal limbo. Folks sometimes are mistaken when they talk about some kind of criminal activity involved in being here without the proper documents. It's a civil offense. It's not a criminal offense. It's important, and I think people do need to understand that there is a rule of law. But you want justice to be served, especially when you're talking about young people who did not make the decision to come here, that they are here. For some of these kids, they live in fear. They live in fear that they're going to be deported, or that their big brother will be deported and their little sister was born here and so is a citizen. It's very complicated with these families. Sometimes the father is a citizen and the mother isn't here with documents. We just think that people should be treated with compassion. And what we're asking politicians, without knowing any kind of magic simple solution to all of this, is please don't punish children for decisions they didn't make. Please don't separate families. That's bad for kids. And please find a way to have these folks that have been here to have a path to citizenship. Having someone stay in a country that they can never call home, never feel like they're where they should be, is not good for the country. It's not good for the community. It's not going to be easy to find those answers, but we know that if we can all agree that children shouldn't be hurt and families shouldn't be separated, that's where we can start the conversation.
Hmm. You mentioned the role that lawmakers play in funding and making very important decisions for schools. One Utah lawmaker recently has been pushing an idea to put a digital device, an iPad or a computer or something, in the hands of every Utah student, and it would be to the tune of like $300 million. So a big deal for us here in Utah. What's your take on these kinds of targeted cash infusions in schools? Good? Bad?
You know, I love telling people I have a master's degree in instructional technology, which I got in 1983 on an Atari 800. Okay, because who was ever going to need more than 64K? But I will tell you the very same thing you just mentioned without knowing any more details than you just mentioned. People all over the country are like iPad crazy. I got one, okay? They're iPad crazy. It's like, hey, let's give every kid an iPad or a laptop or something like that. In 1985, at Orchard, people went, hey, look there are these things called, desktop computers, 286, and let's put a bunch of those in schools. We'll have 5 or 10 or 20 computers in every school. And people were voting technology money. They didn't vote for any software. None. I mean, we played Oregon Trail and Spelling Hangman, and that was how we used our computer lab. And then they didn't train us. They didn't actually say, here's what you could do with this technology that would really bring your lessons to life. They kind of thought that the thing, the little piece of equipment that you could put in a lab and it's nice and shiny, and we don't have to train anybody, and we don't have to say how you're going to use it to integrate your lessons, that the technology is a good in and of itself. I love technology. You could not pry my iPhone from my cold dead fingers. But someone had to actually show me, and it was a 12-year-old actually, show me what I could do with those apps, show me how it made my life easier, show me how much more interesting I would be as a human being, with the right apps. I think that's the part they always miss. They jump to put a piece of hardware in front of you, and I can't tell you how many times I've talked to my colleagues across the country where something very similar was proposed, and they put the technology before they actually asked teachers, how are you going to use this? Or showed teachers how you were going to use this. Technology is incredible. It is incredible in the hands of properly prepared people who have the support that they need to make that technology come alive. Otherwise, it's a very expensive hangman game. And and we'll be doing silly things with some very expensive equipment if you don't do it correctly and do it together. My experience is they usually forget to train the teachers. They just think, here it is, and we'll figure it out. Don't do that to us, and don't do that to the kids, and don't do that to the taxpayers. Make it a system that actually works.
To be fair, I think Speaker Lockhart's bill would involve some planning, some training, and things like that. I want to turn to this so-called teacher tenure issue. A court in California recently struck down tenure as part of a contract for a teacher, and I think it affected hundreds of thousands of California teachers. One Utah teacher, who is also a lawmaker, says it is time to get rid of career status. And what do you think about career status, the so-called teacher tenure issue, from the NEA's perspective?
Most people, when they hear the word tenure, they either think of like a college professor's tenure, where you were elected amongst your colleagues to actually reach a certain level, and for
Looks like we're experiencing some technical issues yet again. I'm very sorry with Lily Eskelsen García. We will try and get her back in just a moment.
The only thing that we have in Utah is that you have the right to due process if you are seen as someone who can't do the job. You have the right to know. You have the right to know what you did wrong, and to defend yourself if you feel like you've been unfairly terminated. So when you take a look at how relevant what happened in California is, we don't have any tenure for K-12 teachers in Utah. Look through every law that you can find. You will not see the word tenure. You will see a due process for teachers if they are going to be terminated, and it's very simple. You have the right to know what you did wrong, and you have the right to defend yourself in front of a hearing officer if you feel you've been terminated unfairly. And so when people actually know what we have in Utah, that could be really a model for the rest of the country. If you have termination laws, if you have due process laws that are so hard for a system to navigate, then yes, you need to look at that, because what we want is to make sure that it's impossible to hire a bad teacher. We want to make sure that your credentials mean something when you get hired, and we want to make sure that once you've proven yourself and gone through a probationary period, that after that you should have some rights to due process if you are terminated. And I will tell you, someone said, well, why would someone want to terminate a teacher for any other reason than because you don't deserve your job? And a lot of teachers will take a deep breath, because almost all of us have had the common experience of someone who got angry because they didn't like a grade, or someone's child who didn't make a team, or because they didn't pass the math class, they didn't get to be on the team, and some very angry people for those kinds of decisions. We live in a very vulnerable place in a classroom when we want to make honest decisions about a child's progress, and that doesn't make you very popular. So I think the very least we should be able to expect is if someone says you're not good enough to be to be a teacher, and we're going to terminate you, that you have a right to know why, and you have a right to defend yourself if you think that it was unfairly done.
Mm. Do you miss teaching? Do you miss the classroom?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, for many years now, just up until the last year, I had a foster class here. There's a school that's really close to the NEA building, and I would bring my guitar so I could be Miss Lily the music lady, and I missed that. It was so wonderful to walk in, because I always worked with the same kindergarten teacher, so I could walk in and all the kids knew who I was, and you knew the kids by name. It wasn't just visiting a class and being the guest. It was actually being part of that team. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to continue doing that as president of NEA. They've already taken up every spare second of my time as scheduled. But it's a magical thing. It's a magical thing. It's why I'm doing this, because I loved that. And I see that in jeopardy, that relationship that you have with a kid that's really excited to come to school today. I want to help make that a reality for more and more teachers who feel like maybe the relationship between a teacher and a student and a parent is what's in jeopardy. And if they can't have that caring relationship, they don't want to teach anymore. I don't want them to give up. I want them to have hope that we'll be able to talk sense into enough of those decision makers that we can keep doing the work we love in the way we know helps children.
Well, you've been very generous with your time. I'm sorry about the technical issues. That's just part of life on new technology. But Lily Eskelsen García, thanks very much for the time, and good luck to you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And a lot more education coverage, particularly here in Utah, right here at sltrib.com. I'm Jennifer Napier-Pearce with the Salt Lake Tribune. Thanks so much for tuning into Trib Talk. We'll see you next time.